Has anyone heard of AGI in the audience? Okay. CopilotKit fans up here. Cool. Well, I'm going to be talking about both of these things today. Nice little architecture diagram about what we're going to be talking about, but really this whole talk is about building agentic applications. I work at CopilotKit. I'm a part of the founding engineering team there. We've been building CopilotKit, which is we like to look at it as the agentic user experience layer of agents. So this is when you actually want to ship your agent to a user. That's what we're focused on, as opposed to squeezing agents and making them great with great architectural decisions and design. The UX of these long-running processes actually changes. That's what we've noticed, at least. And so that's what we built our CopilotKit framework on, and that's also why we shipped AGI. So a little bit about me. I'm Tyler. I used to work in the open source Kubernetes space for a really long time. And I was all in on cloud, really big fan of the whole ecosystem there. And eventually I found that cloud had solved most of the problems that I was interested in solving. There's certainly a lot of work to still be done there. But I found that the AI experience, or specifically interacting with ChatGPT, was super unique and interesting. And I thought, well, it's this interesting thing where it's this long-running process that streams data back to you to make it simulate that actual stuff is completing. But really, you're just waiting, and you're basically looking at a fancy loading screen. And I think that's a pretty interesting user experience change with software, where you have this long-running process, but you need to make it seem like to the user that it's actually not really long running. It's actually quite fast, right? And so what are some of the things that we can do there? That's what we're gonna be talking about today. Everyone here looks like knows what agents are. So hopefully I don't get scrutinized too hard about that, but I'm gonna give a quick little slide about what I see agents as. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about agentic user experience. I'll talk about CopilotKit AGI, and then wrap up with some questions. I'll also do some demos in between there. So already did a quick audience check, but I think everyone here has interacted with or built an agent. Is that correct? Like show of hands, you've built an agent. And I think I think we saw some people actually ship to production. Pretty cool stuff. Was anyone using a framework for that? Or were they kind of hand rolling this? Like, let's say like LangGraph. Who's using LangGraph? Crew AI, Mastra, AG2, AutoGen. Okay, cool. So this is a graph. It's a little bit older now from IBM about how they see what an agent is. But it kind of just looks like a finite state machine, right? You're going through a loop, a series of steps where you're interacting with the agent. And really, agents are just putting LLMs in a box and guiding the path that that box goes down. You have a start and an end, not always, but most of the time. And that can sometimes be in a while loop. And that's what a chat experience is. You're interacting with this stateless LLM that gets all of the previous context. And there's a lot of interesting engineering problems that come up with that. And that's where I think agent frameworks really excel, is managing that context through things like memory primitives and history and all that good stuff. They have a lot of other things like RAG at their disposal to kind of ground the response from the actual LLM. But I think the kind of key thing that when agents were really getting big that I think people tend to forget, even still today, is that agents are just software, right? All of the previous engineering principles that we've learned over the past couple of decades still apply to a large degree. We're still just engineering a problem, but the problem is around this weird box of an LLM. So I want to talk a little bit about great agents today that I interact with daily. I should update this slide. I use Zed a lot, so Zed's on here as well. But really, it's things like Manus is a really great example of what I think a great agentic experience looks like, where you are able to see everything that the agent's doing. You can interrupt it at any point in time. You can physically drive and steer the agent at any point in time. And you can say, hey, that's terrible what you're doing. Do it like this instead. Or, hey, that was great. Let's keep going down this path. Has anyone used Manus before? Anyone Manus fan? It's kind of similar to, I think OpenAI also released something similar recently. Anyone use V0? Played around with that before? Isn't it like a really interesting experience to get an app and see it stream in real time, and you can see all the updates and kind of interact with that experience? And you can even interrupt it and say like, hey, you're going down the wrong path. You can click on an element in it and send that back to the agent, and you're kind of collaborating back and forth. Pretty cool. That also kind of applies to Cursor, which is it's also an application, right? It's built on VS Code, which at the end of the day is built on Monaco, which is just TypeScript, essentially. It's just a bunch of HTML that we're rendering and interacting with an agent to build an application with. And Windsurf is similar. And Zed, I like Zed because it is its own thing. They have this really cool ACP protocol that lets you bring in any agent into that. But what are these applications all share? And I want to go over 5 of these. They all respond early and often. So if I go and I interact with Manus, it's doing this huge process. If I say like research dogs, right? I can see all of the steps that it's taking. It's going to give me a plan. All of this feels super snappy and responsive, but really it's a quite long process, order of minutes pretty often, and much more for longer tasks. But it responds early and it responds often, so it feels snappy, right? I can also work alongside that agent and interrupt it. That's super important for agentic user experience, where the user is watching all of this response come back and can interrupt the agent to say, that's a terrible path that you're taking, and guide it back. They use chat as an interface, not always, but pretty often. Chat is just a very easy way to put your thoughts down and communicate with an agent, similar to like how you might use Slack with your coworkers. But it's not a very discoverable interface. And so there are other things that these agents do where you have buttons like suggestions, you have recommendations of things to do, or, hey, I'm going down this plan. What do you think I should do? It helps you to explore it, right? Think about if you use a Google Home, you don't know what the commands are. You have to ask it, what are your commands, right? So building chat to be discoverable is something that these systems do pretty decently well. It's also a seamless experience across devices, and that's something that we'll talk about with AGUI, where I can, on my phone right now, I can trigger a Manus job, go back to my computer, watch it and steer it, and then I can leave and get a notification that that job completed it. But that was just one seamless experience. And I think that that's a really key thing that long-running tasks are going to have is notifications for basically preempting a human when they need input in a way that can scale to where we actually get notifications, our phones, or on Slack, email. And then finally, I've already mentioned this, but just making sure that they're easily steerable and interruptible. So if I can click at any time on the Manus UI or Vercel's UI or cursor and say, this is the wrong way that you're going, do it like this instead. But I think the fundamental thing that I really want to convey today is that agents change user experience. And I think to a large extent, we haven't even caught up with all of the implications of that. I think that we're bolting on these long-running processes to traditional software principles and design. And some of the applications I mentioned, I feel, are doing a really great job of accelerating what a direction might look like. But I also want to talk a little bit about how do we ship agentic UX? What are some things that we can do today? And specifically talk a lot about CopilotKit and how we are looking at this problem, but just as an industry, how we can actually move forward with that. So I want to talk a little bit about CopilotKit and our protocol AGUI. Skip this slide. So what is CopilotKit? CopilotKit is infrastructure for building AI copilots. Originally, we were built on the GPT 3.5 days, so we were pretty early on this experience. We've had a lot of growth over the last couple of months. Specifically, we're at about 120,000 weekly installs across both of our repos. About 30,000 stars across all of our repos as well. And yeah, all these numbers are going up. We work and consult with a lot of the top Silicon Valley unicorns, as well as some of the Fortune 100s that exist out there. And we're the company behind AGUI. So where does CopilotKit fit in the stack from our perspective? So kind of at the bottom are LLMs, right? And we built agent frameworks around LLMs. We built agents as a concept around them to guide these LLMs. Things like Pydantic AI, LangGraph, Mastra, Korea, Agno. And then at the very top is CopilotKit, where we are consuming consuming the streams of data from these agents directly and giving you a user experience built on top of that. And that specifically is built with AGUI. AGUI is the protocol layer by which you communicate with the agent orchestration frameworks to a client like CopilotKit. We'll get into the architecture here in a little bit. But really, we see kind of two main use cases with agents today, at least, in the immediate term. One is a SaaS copilot. So you have an existing application that you want to let your agent drive. Think of something like Linear. Wouldn't it be so nice if I could, on Linear, without having to use an MCP server, just natively in the UI, have it go and build all of my project management tasks? That's one example. V0 is kind of similar to this as well, but it kind of falls into this category of co-creation copilots, where you are creating something alongside the agent. And those are experiences like Cursor, right? Think of Cursor for X, right? That's really what we're thinking about with co-creation copilots. So I want to take a look at both of these. Keeping in mind, I am not a UI designer, but I've built a lot of these applications over time. And let's just see if this actually expands. There we go. Cool. Looks good. So this is, you might have heard me mention that linear, wouldn't it be nice if linear had a Copilot? This is essentially that. This is built using Mastra. It's communicating to the backend using Mastra, using AGUI to the Mastra agent. I can ask it to do something like, I don't actually have Whisper set up on this computer. Whoops. Plan a Uber app for delivering food with just snakes, plan everything. And so what's going to do here is it's going to say, okay, I'm going to go build a plan. And then this is a really simple example. It's just going to call a tool that is going to update some state. And that state is going to render in our UI here. So I'm already breaking the first principle of responding early and often, but this was a quick little example. Go ahead. Give that a second. Okay, while that's loading, I'm going to show you some, oh, there it goes. Successfully added the food delivery app. And then give it a second to finish. And basically, it's just describing all the tasks that it added. And you can see those tasks actually populate here on the left-hand side. What is actually happening here is there is some state in the agent for all of the users that I've initialized. So for example, I have my name, one of our part of our founding team, our DevRel, our product manager. And it was able to see all that. I was able to render all of this. So all of this UI, these UI components here are actually coming directly from the agent. The agent said, here's the current state of our system. I'm aware of it. And CopilotKit via AGUI is giving that context between both the UI and the agents. And then I asked it to go do some action. I have some generative UI here in Mastra. Their state synchronization is called structured working memory. So this is, it's all tool call based. So it's automatic. Your agent automatically updates some schema that you can then leverage via CopilotKit to render UI, essentially. So that's what's happening here is this is actually a tool call that got called to update the memory. And then we saw once it finished its update, this is all just JSON schema, right? This is what's actually rendering in the UI. Now we can actually see all of these elements in here, right? So what are some other examples? This is actually the first thing I ever built with CopilotKit, which is a travel example. I know there's a lot of these. But what makes this kind of special, in my opinion, is how I approach streaming and how I approach quick responses. So if I ask this to plan a trip to San Francisco, what this is going to do, it's going to be pretty quick. It's going to search for places using Google, tell me what it's searching for, and then it's going to start streaming all of its actual plan directly to me. And all this is happening while I'm talking here, and it feels pretty quick because all this is streaming, but really this is taking 30 seconds, right? Right now, we're basically just waiting for the agent to actually finish. It's not finished, right? We're just still waiting for it. There it goes, it's just finished. But it felt snappier because I'm streaming stuff quickly. So it gave me this is what we call human in the loop. So you remember earlier, agents are interruptible and steerable, right? So the agent is saying, hey, I came up with this plan. What do you think about it? What do you like? What do you want to include? So I can add all of these things and it's going to say, great, cool. I'm going to go build that trip for you. And then it is able to change my screen. Basically, I gave it a tool that says, update what trip we have selected. So I have all of these trips up here. This is a lane graph agent behind the scenes. This is some lane graph state, essentially. And I've loaded it into the UI here. All of those trips exist up there. And I'm currently on the trip to San Francisco. The agent can drive my UI. I can say, like, show me my trip to NYC. I can say, show me my trip to San Francisco. Or I can do a compound action where I can say, plan me a trip. And in the prompting of this, I've actually told it, and then show me that trip, right? So then I can build some UX around this where the agent's actually driving that UI. I can then say, like, what's a good example? Let's go back to our demo viewer here. And everything that we just talked about, we have a bunch of we call them building blocks, essentially, the building blocks of agentic experiences. And so this is our AGUI dojo. We'll get into AGUI in a second. But the AGUI dojo essentially shows you all of the components, all the features that you need to build an agentic experience. These are things like agentic chat. So for example, I can ask this to generate a short sonnet about AI, and it's going to stream those to me. That's the bare minimum hello world example, being able to stream some long amount of data. AGUI and CopilotKit also ship this concept of client-side tools, front-end tools, as we call them internally to CopilotKit. But basically, this is where the AGUI protocol allows you to define a tool on the front end that gets decided to get called by the agent and then gets executed on the front end. So really what happened here was I defined some code for a front-end tool call right here. In this case, we called it use front-end tool to change the background. The agent then decided, okay, this is the gradient color that I want. And then it applied that via React state right here. And then I returned some success that says that was a successful operation. We can also leverage this to render tool calls, right? So if I ask it this is another kind of hello world example you'll see is getting the weather, right? But this is just structured data that we just rendered there. In the actual UI code, we just grab that tool call and we render it based off of if it's complete and what that data looks like. And in the agent itself, it's quite simple. We just have a really simple get weather tool that just defines some static data, so I'm not hammering some person's poor weather API. Another component that we describe pretty often is human in the loop. This is another simple kind of example, just tailored to the dojo, as we call it, which is just all of these features. So it's the exact same kind of thing. I plan something, ask it to perform the steps. It has context of what I decided. And one last demo that I think is pretty cool is this demo where we call it predictive state updates, where the state is updating predictively, and we're just streaming those state updates, right? So in LangGraph, the reason we call it predictive, LangGraph state only emits on node transition. This is actually in between nodes. So we allow you to emit state transitions in the middle. And it generates the story, and then I can ask it to add a character named Courage, and it's going to go through and actually, it goes pretty fast. It actually updates all of that story, and we can see the edit. It's kind of like a cursor type of experience. So that's all the demos I wanted to go over. So how do we make this work for every framework, right? You might have seen here, there's this picker on the top left. We have a ton of framework support. We even support things like A2A, and we could talk about that if you have any questions about how that works. That's something we launched recently. There's a handshake there. But all of these frameworks all just work in the exact same way, right? So I can go and ask it the exact same things to operate with a Pydantic AI agent. And the code is completely different, where I have a completely different Pydantic AI agent that has in this case, we allow it to get the current time. Pydantic AI is a lot less boilerplatey, so there's a lot less going on in here. And we just attach a tool call, and then we also bind in a front-end tool call in the exact same interface. So how does this work for every framework? And that's where AGUI comes in, the Agent User Interaction Protocol. And so the Agent User Interaction Protocol, we originally built this for some hand-rolled integrations with things like LangGraph and CrewAI. And we realized that we actually could make this be a standardized protocol that the agent ecosystem could get behind for streaming and interacting with users specifically. Had a really powerful reception. A lot of these graphs are grossly out of date. We're currently at like 120,000 installs weekly with AGUI. We released about 5 months ago. So it's been a really great traction so far. And if you go on, you'll hear Uli, our one of our co-founders, you'll hear him talk about it pretty often. If you go on LinkedIn and look up AGUI, it never ends. People are really talking about AGUI right now. So as we see it, AGUI has really emerged as a standard amongst the agent ecosystem for building agentic applications, by which you can leverage different clients, right? It's a client-server architecture, and we'll get into the architecture in a second, where servers are emitting AGUI events and there are clients receiving those. CopilotKit being one of the clients, in this case, the React client, right? And we've integrated with most of the first-party, we've had first-party integrations with most of the agent ecosystem. So really quick, what is AGUI? I'm going to say a couple buzzwords and explain them, but it's an open, lightweight, event-based protocol for agent user interoperability. So what does open mean? Open source. The entire spec is open source. There's a community, there's a steering community that you get a part of if you would like to. And we frequently accept new SDKs that come through. We just launched our Kotlin SDK, which is a community contribution. So now every single agent that I listed there can also be consumed by a Kotlin agent, as opposed to just a Kotlin UI, as opposed to just a React UI. It's lightweight, so there's actually just 17 events that translate from these partner integrations. It's event-based, and it looks like the T got dropped, so that's pretty cool. But it's event-based, not even-based. And event-based just means that we have a spec of events that get sent over transports. So that can be an HTTP transport with streamable HTTP like MCP. It could be a socket connection. It can even be things like voice, where you're having an RTC. Is it RTC? WebRTC. You can have a WebRTC connection where you're transferring AGUI events, and that is actually coming through as voice to some multimodal LM. And then finally, it's for agent user interoperability, right? So if I want to swap out my UI to something super custom that I built that isn't CopilotKit, and I want to write it in, I don't know, Rust, then you have the capacity to do that, right? You are using the same events, so it's interoperable bidirectionally. So if you want to use a different agent framework, you could also do the same thing. So if we look at the agent protocol landscape, there's a lot of protocols that are emerging because the principles of software engineering are to some degree shifting when agents, these really weird long-running processes that are non-deterministic, get factored in. And so a couple of just a lay of the land is we see MCP as for tools, context, and resources. There's some stuff coming out of the MCP UI project, so there will also be components that get delivered there that you could consume via AGUI, which we'll be talking about in a bit. A2A is for agent to use or agent to agent communication. So between two non-deterministic, weird, long-running processes, having them communicate with each other, and that's really what they're focused on. And then AGUI sits at the other end, which is consuming these agents and their interactivity with your users. So how does it work? Can everyone in the back see this diagram? Do I need to make it larger? Okay, you got screens back. Incredible. Great venue. So how does it work? We have 16 standard events. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I will show the spec here in a little bit that allow you to interact with your user. They're easily transferable by any method. So HTTP transport, WebRTC, WebSockets. And then it has a client server architecture. So in this case, the server will be the agents and the clients will be things like CopilotKit. But you can see here, we have this the CopilotKit one here in the middle, but we can ship to mobile with Kotlin, for example. We are about to ship an Angular client ourselves. We have somebody working on Svelte clients, and anything that is a client can consume any of these agents. That's the real benefit of this. It's an M times N problem where we took it to M plus N. And we'll talk about that in a second. But on the right-hand side here, I really want to call this out. These are the events that are actually getting streamed. So for example, we can see a text message start event with an ID, and then we can see the deltas of the response, right? So if we look at streaming is efficiently transferred via deltas, where you just have the new tokens as opposed to all of the previous tokens in one message. That's what the entire protocol is optimized around, is state transfer deltas or exists as well, but just delta streaming, right? And this is for a different thing, but that is actually the end of my presentation. I think that I wanted to show the spec. Give me 1 second to show you that. So how can you get started? We have docs for AGUI. We have docs for CopilotKit. If you want to start building a client, we also have some quick starts for building clients, integrations, applications. Let's see what else. I want to show you the spec. So on the right-hand side here, it's a little hard to see, but these are all of the events that we have. So we are pretty conservative with the amount of events that we introduce to the protocol because we want it to be really simple. Any changes that we will make is decided by the community. So we have all these draft proposals of things that are coming soon, like generative user interfaces. So for example, a declarative UI where you are able to define like, here's what my components look like, and here's what I want them to render like. Activity events. So if we think about when I'm doing some long running process and the agent doesn't want to show you something that's streaming, but it wants to tell you I'm searching the internet for X. So like earlier when you saw that travel application, you could see it searching the internet. That's an activity event that we're considering adding into the official spec because it's pretty important for agentic applications. But yeah, cool. So I've been Tyler. This is CopilotKit and AGUI, and happy to take any questions. I think we totally have any time. Yeah, back here.
So we are not using any frameworks, but still we want to use it. And can we use it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our dojo, we actually have an example of this where we call it the server starter, essentially, where you are just emitting these events. And all of these events work, right? If I ask it, if I say hi to this, it's just counting down 10 all the way down to 1. These are pre-coded events that we've written into this agent, which is really just emitting AGUI events in a loop, right? So you can use this to basically ship your agent to any of the clients just by emitting AGUI events. So if we look through here, you'll see it's a good snippet. There's a bunch of stuff. Here we go. Send text message events, right? So in this case, this is Python, right? So we're yielding text message start. So when I say hi to this agent, that's a text message start, and then it starts streaming the deltas, right? So what do the deltas streaming look like? Let's scroll back down here. We can see in a loop, we just yield a text message content event with the delta that we're adding. And CopilotKit is one of the clients, so we can benefit from all that standardization where any of these frameworks can all receive these events. The dojo is built using CopilotKit, so this UI here is what you would get with that. And yeah, you can totally build with anything. You can build with any of the SDKs that we have, you can build whatever you want. It doesn't have to be an agent framework.
Yeah. So, but does any of the content goes to your AI?
No, we do not store or take any information. We're completely open source, and you self-host everything. We do have a cloud offering in case you wanted to, leverage that. That's for hosting of our runtime, which is basically a in-between layer where we can do things at the boundary between agents. Like, for example, we can add guardrails there, and we have a lot of really nice developer experience hooks that allow you to say, like, I don't want these events to leave or enter my system. We also have really nice threading concepts. So, for example, if you have a stream, it goes into that cloud offering that I was mentioning, and you can replay that stream if the user disconnects, for example. And that's like, but all of it just by default, free and open source, self-hostable.
Just one more follow-up question.
Sure.
And how it does take care of like charts and different types of data that it comes up, right?
Yeah. So a lot of we usually call it, like, for example, generative UI. So agentic generative UI here is based off of agent state, but generative UI really just means that the data is generated by an LLM. And what's nice about tools is that they are structured data that comes from an LLM. What can we do with structured data? We can render it, right? And so in this case, when I ask it to generate this plan with the server starter, it's just generating these events, and I'm rendering that. This is all just data that the LLM, in this case, there's no LLM, but there's just an LLM generated this data, and then I render it, right? So that's all the generative UI is basically just structured rendering of generative data. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah.
The UI components get generated, or is the developer writing the?
As a developer, you have full control. We do have support for you asking the LLM to generate it and then inserting it into the UI. We generally don't recommend it just because there's a lot of shenanigans you can get into with that, mainly around consistency. That, if you tell an agent, hey, generate this chart, and you give it no context, you'll get 5 different results every single time if you tried 5 times. So generally we recommend against that. That's why we go with this structured approach. We're also thinking about things like declarative UI, where you say, like, I want to generate a form, and it generate you attach that to something like a component library, where, like, shadcn, for example. What if an LLM could leverage shadcn to get data from the user, right? So you could have a calendar widget that it pulls from a component library. That's the other. It's like a spectrum, right? On this side is completely static UI that we've been working with for the last 30 years. On the other side is fully generative, like V0 UI.
Right.
And we kind of have the opinion that most software right now will sit really in the middle until we get much better with LLMs.
What if you, like, within the chat, you ask something that's kind of out of scope, but then can be done with UI? For example, you're ordering, like, the food delivery app, and then you said, can you get me some groceries or something, which is not part of the the loop that you have. So
So you're asking if it can on the fly come up with UI for a user's query?
Yeah, it just looked like that. I didn't see the code behind it when you demoed.
Oh yeah.
It
So
looked like it was just streaming everything, so I thought it was building the UI itself.
yeah, no, it kind of looks like that because we're streaming the deltas, right? But in this travel example that we showed earlier, maybe that's what you were thinking of. Inside of this example, when I ask it to, like, plan a trip to SF, really what's happening here is the state, or this is a tool call basically, where I'm emitting the deltas of the argument streaming, because the arguments also stream from a tool call. And so these are all the args of a structured data. And CopilotKit has a nice feature where we do JSON diff building. So this is all incomplete JSON that's actually rendering that we handle for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And you can build these generative experiences as incomplete partial JSON comes through. We allow you to render that in a streamed way. So it seems kind of magical, but really you still define this component. This is all just reactively responding to, if you're familiar with React, this is just React state that's coming from our agents that we're then rendering our UI to give a streamed experience.
Like, you're able to render partial components as
Yeah.
partial data comes in.
Yeah, exactly. So if I actually ask that exact same query again, we can kind of see it in action. So let's give this a second. Gonna search, and then all of this data that's streaming through, this is all incomplete JSON. Like, this is not fully generated yet, but I'm still getting the star. You can see it, like, build it in real time. You can even see what it doesn't and does have. Like, for example right there, it didn't have the star count. They built the star component and then got the star data, that sort of thing.
But the UI is written by developers.
Yes, yeah, you have full control over that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So what is the fundamental problem UG-AI protocol solves?
The fundamental problem the AGUI protocol solves is for mainly like user interactivity. So things like interrupts, right? How do I interrupt my agents? And how does that get translated to agent frameworks or my own agent framework? That's one thing that we tackle. Streaming is another thing. But really the whole thing that we're trying, like the fundamental problem that we're trying to tackle is that every single agent framework has a different streaming protocol and every single client has a different way to consume those. And we want to standardize that, where now every single agent framework is emitting the same protocol that you can then use to render any single client. As opposed to if you wanted to say use LangGraph and you went and used their use stream from LangGraph and React, and then you said, okay, now I want to ship this to my mobile app, right? Well, now you're gonna have to go build a whole set of new events because you can't use the use stream thing in Kotlin, for example. Same thing with Pydantic AI, right? If you want to ship to React UI, you'd go build it in React and have all the responsive design there. If you want to then go ship it to Kotlin, okay, now you have to go do all of that work again. What AGUI does is build a bunch of clients, allow you to receive those events just reactively without having to worry about, what framework am I using? What events is it emitting? How do I render those events? That's really what we're focused on. Does that make sense?
Let's say 2 years down the road, if all the agent frameworks go away, you only have AgentKit from OpenAI.
Mhm.
Then would we still need CopilotKit?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at
We have so many agent frameworks right now. If we
Mhm.
go to 2 or 3.
Yeah.
OpenAI, Claude. Then would we still need CopilotKit then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think so, mainly because CopilotKit is fully open source always, right? So if you look at something like AgentKit with ChatKit, it's a fully verticalized solution. You're locked into the OpenAI ecosystem. And as more and more things verticalize, I think you'll notice that, I mean, this is the same question today. Like, why ever use another cloud that isn't AWS? Why ever do anything in that space when you could just use AWS? And I think that's certainly for a really long time with AWS, that was the case, where AWS just dominated and that was all that people used. But I think now, you see, what is the name of it? Azure. I was thinking of the even smaller one. I think it's DigitalOcean. Yeah, DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean can exist. Vercel can exist because people I don't think really want verticalized solutions. They just want solutions to their problems that they own. And I think that AgentKit is a great solution if you're in the OpenAI ecosystem. I think certainly the different large model providers will start to verticalize as well. Maybe I can't speak for them, but I do think that there's a place for CopilotKit to be the horizontal layer as opposed to a verticalized layer. And that's how we see it really is we are envisioning a horizontal world where I think each model provider wants to be the verticalized world, right? They want to own the entire stack. And certainly you can see this with things like Vercel and OpenAI now as well. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? I think we have about 4 more minutes. Yeah.
Great demo. Love the talk. I love the idea. Gonna give it a shot. Are there anything else like this that people are trying to do?
Anything else like this? Yeah, I think that everyone is thinking about UI. Now we've squeezed agents for the last 2 years basically, and we said, okay, we're really trying to make these great, and now we're trying to get them to users, and they look like a loading wheel. And you're like for example, you saw me earlier. I was sitting with this demo. I broke my own principle with the linear demo I showed you, where it's just sitting there, right? And you're like, I'm demoing. You need to show me something to look cool. I think I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that that's not going to cut it from a user experience perspective. And I think that's why things like Vercel, like Manus, like Cursor take off, because they feel super snappy, but they're the same thing, right? They're still loading wheels that you can click interrupt on. And so I think for example, MCP, the MCP UI project is great. It's, for example, what if we could ship components via MCP, right? Which is very compatible to AGUI also, where you might have an agent that calls an MCP server that then returns a component that you then transfer via AGUI to your front end, right? Yeah, and I think that's a really good example. I think what you'll notice is that a lot of people are just hand rolling this right now. And we're really trying to standardize that, where it's easier you don't have to go hand roll it and reinvent the wheel every time. And so, if we look at all these applications, how many of them went and just built their own thing? I think most of them, right? For example.
So out of the 3 quick starts, which one do you see more people doing, the integrations or the application?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on who you are. Certainly when we launched AGUI, there was a lot of, let's go build a ton of integrations. And so now we have like a dozen integrations. And so that was the N. We have a ton of integrations. Now we need more M's. And so now people are building more clients. And so now we're shipping things like the Kotlin SDK from the community. We have a Rust SDK coming from the, I forget the name of the framework, but it's a Rust agent framework, Java-based client. And really, we're trying to fulfill on both visions, right? So it really depends on who you are. If you are a fantastic Dart developer and you want to go write a Dart SDK, maybe you probably start with the building a client. But if you are an agent framework that's trying to get started, you might start with the build integrations. Or if you are your own, you don't want to use an agent framework at all, you just want to hand roll your own thing, that's where the integrations would also fall. And just for anyone else that's here, this dojo is a checklist, actually. So if you did want to go and build your own integration today, you can clone this repo. We have a command that's create, it's like pm create integration. It'll scaffold all of the stuff that you need to actually go make that. And then you just insert your Python code, you insert your TypeScript code, and basically you go through each of these features and can check it off and try it out. So like, for example, we implemented that with this server starter where, it just counts down, but you can kind of go in through and check if these things work for you. Cool. I think that's my time. Thanks, everyone.